I'd like to talk about the Pope's visit and the importance of how it's tying into history of the First Nation people in Quebec and also in eastern United States. And the theme of all the locations that he visited had a theme that tied into St. Anne's and the meaning of St. Anne's and how that's all connected to the sky. And I also want to talk about the very first sainted First Nation woman. Her name is Kateri Tekawitha, and why he saluted her. He showed that this was really important to do with his visit. And I'll go into the history of her as well. When he arrived in Canada, the moon was just at the tip of the Silver Gate of Isis on the Orion Hammer. And this is just above the Crab Nebula where Trump was born. And the sun, of course, was in Cancer on the Tegman star. The Tegman star represents the armor, like the shell around you. Okay, then the Manger of Christ is on the beehive cluster right in the center of Cancer, and that is the gateway of man. I found this site called romereport.com, and I guess it's a site for the Vatican, and it's on YouTube. And some interesting, features that they put on there that you don't really see in the mainstream news. And this was one of them. When Trump and Melania went to visit the Pope, this is what the Pope said to him when they were exchanging gifts. He said, "It is my strongest desire that you be the olive tree to make peace." Now, the olive tree represents Athena, right? She is the warrior goddess. It's feminine, but she has a masculine connotation to her. And she won the prize to have Athens named after her because she brought the gift of the olive tree. This is in the mythology of Athena. So it's always connected to Trump because he's a big figure in our reality right now. And the Pope, what the Pope is saying to him is all part of this, script that we're in. There was a very emotional moment when the Pope was wearing the headdress, and this lady in the audience came and started singing "O Canada" in her native language. And the translation of what she said is in this text. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's an interpretation here that she said first she told the Pope to take the headdress off. Social media sources said she sang a prayer song to the tune of "O Canada." Small boy Marie shared the song she said in our language, our sacred space, from the stars to whom we are connected as one, our sacred space to the stars, our truth. She also added her words at the end were choppy and hard to understand, something that was not theirs to give or transfer, and something she speaks for your own selves. So it's like she's saying, you traded the land and it didn't belong to you. Rough translation, what she said at the end of the song, she said something like, "Take your men and go home and right the wrongs of the past." Also, she said that the land was clean and pure before the colonizers and the church came, and that he should denounce the doctrine of discovery. Thank you both for sharing and helping to get the true story out there. It was a very brave and powerful thing for this woman to speak truth to power. Yes, the headdress that he wore had like a big cross on the center of it, which, always reminds me of the two eclipses crossing at St. Louis. St. Louis, you have to remember when Kateri Tikawitha was actually denouncing her own native culture to become a Christian. That was her history. That when that was happening, King Louis was in power. He was building the Versailles in France, and he was known as the Sun King. Okay, later on, King Louis the 16th was actually helping the Patriots and paying for the Patriots to fight Britain. And then he was married to Marie Antoinette, and then the masses turned against him and they chopped their heads off. Okay, so I'm not going to go into history all that, but I just want you to understand the time frame and how St. Louis is really important, or where the two eclipses are crossing. It's referring to Louis, right? So King Louis. We also have outside of Montreal, there's Lake St. Louis, and this is all referencing to King Louis. So we have the two eclipses crossing, the United States making the X. The X also represents Venus. Okay, it's like when you create a pentagram, there's an X in the center. And the esoteric symbol for Venus is to put your hands across your chest. Okay, this is the symbol for Venus, is the X. Venus rules Taurus, where the silver gate is, where the moon was when he arrived. And Venus also rules justice, Libra. Okay, so, it's the whole understanding of justice and Mother Earth. Mother Earth is Taurus, because it's ruled by Earth and Venus. And then air in Venus is justice, the Libra symbol. And of course, Venus, Sun, Earth conjunctions happen every 8 years. There's 5 of them, and they create the pentagram. I believe there was mixed feelings among the First Nation people on the whole perception of him coming here and apologizing, and a lot of them said that he didn't do enough. Okay, this is one of the media doing the reference of somebody complaining about the Pope not really doing enough, and that they need to bring one of the Catholic priests, Johann Revoix, to Canada. For years, survivors in northern Canada have alleged that Mr. Revoix engaged in patterns of sexual abuse at multiple Catholic-run schools over the course of several decades. In March, Mr. Revoix, now 93, was charged with sexual assault and a Canadian-wide arrest warrant by the RCMP in Nunavut. And on Wednesday, the federal justice minister confirmed a request for extradition had been sent to France, where Mr. Revoix currently lives. So, they're trying to make it look like, they're going to create justice to the people that are still living that created these crimes against humanity. Later on, the moon moved from Taurus through Gemini, went across. Venus is right between the two Gemini twins, which is like, one is the mortal twin, one is the immortal twin, Pollux and Castor. And Venus is right between there, but then the sun ends up becoming the new moon. It wasn't an eclipse, but, because it wasn't on the ecliptic, but it was a new moon on the beehive cluster, which is the manger of Christ. So we had the moon and the sun conjunct on the manger of Christ when the Pope was visiting Canada. Pope Francis prayed and blessed the pilgrims with water from the lake, now known as Lake St. Anne, or Lac St. Anne, called the Lake of the God, okay, by the Nakota Sioux Nation. So this lake is really, really important to the First Nation people, and he stopped to visit there. Now, the name St. Anne is going to be a theme to his whole trip. They've actually tied in the cardinal points. So, accompanied by native chiefs in full regatta, the feathered headdresses, he followed a winding path through the fields to the shore. There, the head of the Catholic Church, followed by indigenous traditions, he blessed the waters of the lake, turning to the east, south, west, and north, as is the indigenous movement of prayer, oriented in four cardinal directions according to the movement of the sun. The day before, during the meeting in the Church of the Sacred Heart of the First People, the National Parish of Canadian Indigenous People, the Pope meditated on the cosmic meaning given to the cardinal directions. These, he said, are understood not only as geographical reference points, but also as dimensions that embrace the whole of reality and indicate the way to heal it. I found that really fascinating statement, what he just said there. So they represent dimensions that embrace the whole of reality and indicate the way to heal it. Then the Pope added, Jesus, with the extremities of his cross, embraces the cardinal directions and unites the most distant people. Jesus heals and pacifies everything. So he's saying the cross of Christ represents the cardinal directions. So he's saying the Jesus cross is the cardinal cross. Okay, so that's like, wow. You guys know that I've always been talking about the cardinal cross as being the high cross. So I was really blown away by him saying that. The Canadian Encyclopedia has that the lake came from Reverend Jean-Baptiste Thibault. He was a priest, and his patron was Saint Anne de Beaupré. And the shrine became a pilgrimage destination in 1889 when rain fell following prayers. So they did like a rain prayer, and it happened. Okay, so that's why the lake is sacred. And I know you can do this, like if you're on the sacred locations and there's a lot of people praying, you can make the rain come. I know Dan Winter talks about that. And the Saint Anne de Beaupré is really important. She's a patron, and that's the church he went to outside of Quebec City. That's the name of the church. So there's a theme going on about Saint Anne. And who is Anne? Anne is the mother of the Virgin Mary. So the grandmother of Jesus. Lac Saint Anne is in Edmonton. But another St. Anne shrine is on Lake Champlain, which is the original Iroquois River that was running up, from Vermont and New York up to, Quebec City. And this is like the Canadian border is running between the tip of Lake Champlain there. But outside of Plattsburgh in Burlington, there's a cluster of islands, and that's where the St. Anne's Shrine is. This was a very extremely important river for the First Nation people. And the Roman Catholic shrine is on Ile La Motte in Vermont on the shores of Lake Champlain. So they used this, the history was in 1666. So this is all the time when Kateri was alive. A fort and chapel was built on the Ile de La Motte to protect Montreal from attacks by the Iroquois Indians. Both the fort and the chapel were dedicated to Saint Anne, the mother of the Virgin Mary. In 1668, the Bishop of Quebec, François de Laval, came to the Ile de Motte to baptize a number of Iroquois to Christianity. Even after the abandonment of the fort, the shrine continued to offer mass to worshippers. Okay, so the theme what I started to realize, the theme were all the spots that he was going on his trip were all places that have, tied into the theme of First Nation people converting to Christianity. So the island got its name from Captain Pierre Lamotte, and they were building all these forts along this river. So they had the Fort Richelieu, Fort Chambly, which is also known as, I think, St. Louis, and Fort Saint Therese. This was all in 1665. And then in 1666, Fort Saint Jean, the farther south, Fort Saint Anne on Ile de Motte was added. The fort included Saint Anne's Shrine. So there's Saint Anne's Shrine. There's also Fix Farms is there now. Well, it was built, and there's this history that Vice President Theodore Roosevelt was at this island when he found out that President William McKinley was shot. Now, the church that the Pope visited when this new moon was in conjunct with the sun on the manger of Christ was this church called St. Anne's de Beaubry, and it's just outside of Quebec City. And Lac St. Anne in Edmonton, the patron that it's named after is the same patron that this church is named after, St. Anne de Beaubry. The Basilica de St. Anne de Beaubry is a major Roman Catholic place of pilgrimage. It has a copy of Michelangelo's statue, the Pietà. The original is at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And that's an important statue, and I had mentioned this before in a video long ago. It was all tying into the World Fairs. The Basilica is known as a place of miracles. One of the builders of the original church, Louis Dumont, I think it was Delmont, helped build the church despite having severe scoliosis and needed the aid of a crutch. When the church was complete, he was able to walk independently. Okay, so he got cured. So this church is like a healing center. The town is home of the Cyclorama of Jerusalem, a circular painting depicting the city of Jerusalem at the time of the death of Jesus. There's St. Anne's that's above the doorway of going into the church. Now, the original reason why I was so fascinated with this church and his stop there was, one of the statues there is Kateri Tekakwitha. She's at the Basilica of St. Anne de Beaubry. So that's when I was kind of like, I guess I better learn about her. And then the fact that the Rome television station did, a clip of him worshiping a statue of her, I was like, okay, there's some huge history here that I need to understand. Now, she's known as the fairest flower that ever bloomed among red men. The first account of Kateri Tekakwitha was not published until 1715. Because of Tekakwitha's unique path to chastity, she is often referred to as the lily. She's known as the Lily of the Mohawks. Traditional symbol of purity associated with the Virgin Mary since the medieval period. So that's interesting because the flower of Quebec is the lily. It's also very popular in France. Religious images of Tekakwitha are often decorated with a lily and a cross, with feathers or turtle as cultural accessories alluding to her native birth. Okay, so she's Lily of the Mohawks, pure and tender lily, the flower among true men, the lily of purity, new star of the new world. Her tribal neighbors refer to her as the fairest flower that ever bloomed among red men. Yeah, so I like that, the new star of the new world. Okay, so that's maybe why, big part of why, he was doing all these trips. At first you think of it like, he wanted, to represent them converting. but maybe it's a little bit more esoteric than that. It's not such black and white here. So she was canonized on October 21st, 2012 by Pope Benedict the 16th. In the official canonization rite booklet, Catherine is used in English. So she was given the name Catherine when she was baptized, and this is to honor Catherine of Siena. Now, why was she important? A lay member of the Dominic order, was a mystic, activist, and author who had a great influence on Italian literature and on the Catholic Church. Canonized in 1461, she is also a doctor of the Church. Okay, and then down here, they're saying she was the second woman to be declared a doctor of the Church on October 4th, 1970. Okay, so she's really important as well, right? Because they canonize Kateri in 2012, but this Catherine, doctor of the Church, in 1970. And what gets really weird is that she was similar to Kateri, where she ends up, going into fasting, and then she ends up dying from the fasting. And this is similar, I believe, to what Kateri died from. It was from her own causes. So they're saying here, a biographer reports in his bowdlerized version, but the ring of Christ's foreskin. Okay, so there's a mystic marriage of St. Catherine, is this mystic marriage underlying the extent in which the marriage was a fusion with Christ's physicality. Catherine received not the ring of gold and jewels, but Christ's foreskin. So it's a ring. I'm just like, okay, that's a little crazy, but yep. Now, judging that she was ready, Lamberville baptized Ketawitha at the age of 19 on Easter Sunday, April 18th, 1676. Ketawitha was named Catherine after St. Catherine of Siena. And it was the Mohawks' form of the name. Yeah, so Kateri was the Mohawk form of Catherine. After Catherine was baptized, she remained in Caughnawaga for 6 months. Some Mohawks opposed her conversion and accused her of sorcery. Lamberville suggested that she go to the Jesus Mission in Kanawaki, located south of Montreal on the St. Lawrence River, where other native converts were gathered. Catherine joined them in 1677. Ketawitha was said to have put thorns on her sleeping mat and laid on them while praying for her relatives' conversions and forgiveness. Piercing the body to draw blood was traditional practice of the Mohawk and the Iroquois nations. She lived in Kanawake the remaining 2 years of her life. She learned more about Christianity under her mentor Anastasia, who taught her about the practice of repenting for one's sins. When the women knew of the religious sisters, they wanted to form their convent and create an informal association of devout women. Yeah, so Father Kolonik wrote that Ketawitha said, I have deliberated enough for a long time. My decision on what I will do has been made. I have consecrated myself entirely to Jesus, Son of Mary. I have chosen him for my husband, and he alone will take me for wife. So wow, she was like really convinced that she was the bride of Jesus. And she was like repenting, I guess, for other people's sins and like really like torturing herself. She escaped her village and then headed north for 6 days up the Richelieu River and then over to the St. Lawrence where the rapids were. And that's where the mission was for the conversion of natives to Christianity. And here's the mission started at the, right at the rapids, and then they ended up over on the point at Kanawaki on the left there. I circled it red. So yeah, and then there's Mount Royal, and they could see the view of to Mount Royal from where they were on the south side of the St. Lawrence, where the rapids were. And here they're saying how on the rapids, that's the meaning of the word Kanawaki. So they have a shrine for her called the Canada National St. Kateri Shrine. And those are her relics and also her shrine, basically, that they had moved and transported it there. I think we did it in the 70s and created this shrine for her in the church in Kanawaki. I was fascinated to see that on the site of the Canadian National St. Kateri Shrine, they're talking about the World Trade Center. So other items of interest in the church include a replica of United States World Trade Center fashioned by our Mohawk ironworkers and the legendary Deerfield bell. Okay, so they show the bell in the previous slide that I showed, but the reason is that a lot of these First Nation people went down and worked, the iron workers worked on the World Trade Center when it was being built. So they have a connection to it, but it's just interesting that they've connected it at her shrine. Her story was the mother was a Algonquin mother and a Mohawk father. And when the smallpox devastated her village, many perished along with Kateri's parents and younger brother. She survived the deadly disease, but her eyesight was greatly affected and her face ravaged with smallpox scars. So she was left alone in a tribe that had kidnapped her from the Northern Territory and brought her there. So I guess she didn't really feel like she fitted in very well. In 1667, 11-year-old Kateri meets the Jesuit missionaries in her uncle's cabin. By this time, the village had moved to the north side of the Mohawk River in Caughnawaga, now known as Fonda, New York. And it's weird because Kanawaki up in Montreal, when I was young, used to be called Caughnawaga. So they've used these names back and forth between these two locations. So as a young girl, she helped with the meals, collected berries from the woods, made baskets, did beadwork, and strung the wambums. The coming of the missionaries, Kateri found comfort and understanding of her situation in Christianity and began her dialogue with Father James de Lamberville and the ardent desire for baptism in 1666. So we have the number 666. And was subsequently baptized in 1676 at the age of 20. In 1677, Kateri traveled from the Mohawk Valley to the northern eastern part of the territory to the village of Kanawaki and the mission of St. Francis Xavier on the shore of the St. Lawrence River. Father de Lamberville had given her a letter for the superior of the mission. The words of the letter were, "I ask you to please take charge of directing her. It is a treasure which we are giving you. Guard it well and make it bear fruit for the glory of God and the salvation of a soul which is certainly very dear to him." A few months after her arrival, she received her first Holy Communion on Christmas Day at the age of 21. In 1680, with her health failing, she became gravely ill, and on April 17, 1680, at 24 years old, she died. Soon after her death, and because of her faith in Christ, her scarred face was restored to its former beauty and softness. She was buried in a wooden coffin next to a wooden cross where she prayed on the banks of the great river, the St. Lawrence River. The favors and miracles obtained through her intercession began immediately. In 1717, the Mohawks of Kanawaki moved to their final and present-day location, where Kateri's remains were housed in a sacred chest on a polished wooden floor. Okay, so this is really close to where I was brought up. And I was actually put in the river on that reserve the very first time my feet touched the water was from my grandfather, putting me into the water, my heels into the water, right by the Ile de Tekakwitha. There's an island there called the Ile de Tekakwitha where they do the powwows every year on that reserve. And I had no idea of this information before the Pope came this week. Okay, so I am just like blown away because I didn't know that that mission was where they were converting First Nation people into Christianity. It was the first mission in Eastern Canada and Eastern United States, really. So anyhow, she's worshipped all over North America. There's other stories saying that, you know, she had a white aura around her when she died. So on Saturday, December 6, 1884, the bishops and archbishops of the United States of America and the Third Plenary Council of Baltimore addressed the sovereign pontiff Leo XIII to institute the process of beatification of Catherine Tekakwitha. So they've been asking for her to be sainted for a long time, again in 1931, and then again in 2011, and then she was sainted canonization ceremony on October 21st, 2012 in Rome, Italy. And they have a shrine at Kanawaki. This is all the different locations where she has statues. Of course, the statue of the saint is installed outside the Basilica of St. Anne de Beaubry in Quebec. That's where the Pope went. And then you can see there's one in New York, in Lewiston. There's St. Patrick Cathedral in New York. Where else? There's one in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. These are all esoteric, very historic spots where the natives had significance. So Paris, Stark County, Ohio, Rogers, Arkansas, Niagara Falls, New York, Sisseton, South Dakota. So you can see that Arizona as well. So like she represents the First Nation people because of her conversion to Christianity. So if she had known what was going to happen to the First Nation people, decades later with what happened in these residential schools, would she have converted? Who knows? All I know is, she had a great devotion to a higher consciousness, and then they, brought her into Christianity. And, so the whole representation of is he worshiping the conversion when he comes here and goes to all these places which are basically representing her. is he worshiping the conversion instead of worshiping their own religion, right? So there's always a faction going on between the ancient religions that worshipped the gods, like the gods, multiple gods, like the god of the wind, the god of the fire, all this, which is really kind of like paganism, or, that's why they refer it to. It's almost savage-like. They think back in those days they called them savages because they were worshiping dream gods and everything. And so, for me, I guess when they started bringing these missionaries over, they divided the First Nations people. Some of them went to Christianity, some didn't. So then they start fighting among themselves. It's just always division, right? It's always like, let's bring in something, a philosophy, and let's create division. As long as they're fighting each other, they're not recognizing, who's causing this division. So it's like, it's all fascinating. It's kind of just history repeating itself. But I just found it fascinating that he went to all these places that were really worshiping her. But it goes even deeper than that, because I'm going to show you it's actually worshiping the sky. With the path that he took through Canada is actually referring to the sky. And with him talking about those cardinal points, he knows that it's really about worshiping, the higher cardinal points of earth, air, wind, and fire, right? So it's like spirit and fire. It's like we know that. That's what religion is, but it's hidden from the masses. So anyhow, it's really fascinating. But it all goes back to the sky, and I'll show you how it all ties in. It ties into the Milky Way. And what's even more crazy for me is that my late husband's sister and her husband came to stay with me, and she went to the powwow on Ile de Tekawetha Island in Kanawaki. And when she was there, she purchased a bunch of sage with all the chakras, little flowers with the colors of the chakras on it. And the day that I saged my house, that night is when all this information came to me. Okay, so I'm just like, oh my God, like it's what's the chances of that happening? I'm just kind of like, this is really coming full circle for me, that why I understand why I'm living in Quebec. Okay, because there's a high spiritual energy here, that because of the whole founding of North America was happening from the East Coast and all to do with New France and everything. There's really spiritual connection that, ties into the First Nations people. So here they're explaining her penance. She believed in the value of offering suffering. She did not eat very much and was said to add undesirable taste to her food. She would lie on a mat with thorns. This was a custom among Native Americans peoples at the time, and piercing oneself with thorns in thanksgiving for some good or an offering of oneself or other needs. Knowing the terrible burns given to prisoners, she burnt herself. Her spiritual counselor, Anastasia, seemed to have encouraged her penance. And with her friend Marie Theresa, Tekawitha readily took up penance. Her health always being poor, and it weakened. So Mary Theresa sought the help of Chartier. He scolded the young woman, saying that the penance must be used in moderation. He told the two that they must have him improve their penance, lest they become unreasonable. So, she listened to the priest, and from then on practiced whatever penance the priest would allow her, but nothing more. So she was like really into self-suffering, right? So around the Holy Week in 1680, friends noted that Tekawitha's health was failing. When people knew she had but a few hours left, villagers gathered together, accompanied by the priests, and they provided the last rites. So she died at 3 p.m. on Holy Wednesday, April 17th, 1680, at the age of 23 or 24 in the arms of Mary Teresa. Okay, so I should really check that time out in the sky. 3 p.m. on April 17th, 1680. So this is the sky the day she died. Saturn and Pluto were both in Gemini. So Saturn was on Castor and Pluto was on Pollux, which is the ascended soul. So your soul is really Pluto. So she was on the ascended soul, twin. And then Venus was on the tail of the whale, which is where the 3 guided stars come down from the equatorial grid. That's a very important part of the sky. And I do believe that right-hand fish is the crown of Christ. It's like a pentagon shape, but I do believe that is the crown of Christ that Christ wears. It's called the circlet of Pisces. And we had Neptune, which would be the shaman, the one that can go between different dimensions, the person that is able to heal from going into dream state. It's all to do with metaphysics, and I do believe that represents Jesus. And it's going into Aquarius on the tail of Capricorn, which is the Wheel of Fortune star. And then the moon is in Ophiuchus, so the doorway, right? It's all to do with transformation, death, that's all to do with your emotions and your ancestral memory. So it was a very esoteric placement in the sky with all the planets. And then we also had Jupiter and Mercury still in Aries, with the sun in Aries, which is the crown chakra, the sun on the head of Sittis, which is the hand of God. And then Uranus, which is heaven, with the war planet, which is the warrior within, is in Pisces in conjunction, which is Pisces rules the 12th house of, Pisces rules religion and your psyche. And then I said Venus again is in there on the tail of the whale. So they're saying that she grew up in a period of upheaval with the Mohawks' interaction with the French and the Dutch colonists, who were competing in the lucrative fur trade. The Mohawks, initially, who had settled in Albany. Okay, so it's all to do with the Iroquois River, which is now called the Richelieu River. So they're just really, we're all fighting over the trades for the fur trade, right? So they're saying here, Tekakwitha, around 10-year-old, fled into the cold October forest. That's when she fled to come up north to get away from the tribe that had taken her out of the Northern Territories, where she really was born into, and they had taken her more south, and she wanted to go back, because she had relatives that were Christians. Okay, so they're just explaining all that there. And then the Feast of the Dead, later in 1669, so this is before she was dead, she died in 1680. The Iroquois Feast of the Dead, held every 10 years, was conveyed in Caughnawaga. That would be in Fonda, New York. So the different tribes came all over, and they were worshiping their fellow citizens. Many others who had died in previous decades were being carefully exhumed so that their souls could be released to the land of the West. Okay, so they had this tradition, Feast of the Dead, and it would happen every 10 years to set the souls free from this realm. So according to a 1936 book about Tekakwitha, Perion attacked the Feast of the Dead's beliefs and logic. At the assembled Iroquois, upset over his remarks, ordered him to be silent, telling the Iroquois to give up their superstition rites. So, it's like they weren't allowed to have their sacred ceremony about how they saw death, right? That was really, they don't want you to believe that your soul has a path and then, reincarnates. And that's what the First Nation people believed. So they didn't want reincarnation, because then they can manipulate you in this realm for your one life, thinking that, this is the only life you have, and, be terrified of losing it. But if you believe in spirituality and you believe in reincarnation, you're not terrified of losing this avatar that you're in. Okay, so this is kind of the whole precept of how fear is created. It's about, being terrified of losing your body, but if you're a spiritual person, you are not your body. She also healed people if you prayed to her. So Joseph Kellogg was a Protestant child captured by the natives in the 18th century and eventually returned to his home. 12 months later, he caught smallpox. The Jesuits helped treat him, but he was not recovering. They had relics of Tekakwitha's grave, but did not want to use them on a non-Catholic. So one Jesuit told Kellogg that if he would become a Catholic, help would come to him. So Joseph did so, and the Jesuits gave him a piece of decayed wood from Kateri's coffin, which is said to have made him heal. The historian Alan Greer takes this account to mean that Tekakwitha was known in the 18th century New France, and she was already perceived to have healing ability. Other miracles were attributed to Kateri. Father Remy recovered his hearing, and a nun in Montreal was cured by using items formerly belonging to Kateri. Such incidents were evidence that Kateri was possibly a saint. Following the death of a person, sainthood is symbolized by events that show the rejection of death. It is also represented by a duality of pain and neutralization of the other's pain, all shown by her reputed miracles in New France. So I guess it's like her taking on the pain of other people's suffering and then creating miracles. She became so famous for healing that her fame was said to reach Jesuits in China and their converts. On December 19th, 2011, Pope Benedict XVI approved the second miracle needed for Kateri's canonization. The authorities' miracle dates from 2006, when a young boy in Washington state survived a severe flesh-eating bacterium. Doctors had been unable to stop the disease's progress by surgery and advised his parents he was likely to die. The boy received the sacrament of anointing of the sick from a Catholic priest. As the boy in half-Lumen Indian, the parents said that they prayed to Tekakwitha for divine intercession and did their family and friends, and an extended network contracted through their son's classmates. And Sister Kateri Mitchell visited the boy's bedside and placed a relic of Tekakwitha, a bone fragment, against his body and prayed together with his parents. And the next day, the infection stopped its progression. So wow, so that's why she was, sainted. So the Mohawk scholar, Orenda Butcher, noted that despite extensive support for the canonization of Tekakwitha, some traditional Mohawks see her as a connection to the worst aspects of colonialism. They do not believe that she embodied or reflected traditional Mohawk womanhood, yet the same article quotes Russell Roundpoint, director of the Mohawk History and Cultural Center at Akawasni, was said her sainthood is not a contentious issue by the stretch of the imagination, and that the Mohawk people are very proud of the fact that she has attained such a high level. So the American Protestants directed a negative response to Tekakwitha's veneration. Historian Alan Greer, who studied connections between Tekakwitha and anti-Catholicism in America, stated that Catholics needed her in society and viewed the church as foreign. Protestants were afraid that the U.S. saint canonization would bring more Catholic power into America, while the Catholics wanted to solidify the church more into society. Protestant newspapers, such as the Methodist Review, warned its readers to beware of these canonizations. So it's like, it's always division, whatever. So then the historian K.I. Copperdragger has suggested that the Catholic Church's fathers' hagiography of Tekakwitha reflected some of the trials and rewards of the European present in the New World. She captured the imagination and some observers based on the accounts from 2 Jesuit priests who knew her. At least 300 books have been published in more than 20 languages on her life. So yeah, she's pretty famous, and I had no idea. I didn't know anything about her. So how she's famous, but you have to seek the knowledge, right? It's not something they're going to come out and tell you, because it is a controversial topic. She got smallpox from white man, killed her whole family, and then felt rejected from her tribe, didn't want to get married because she felt like she wasn't attractive. And then these priests come into her tribe, and she gets converted, and then starves herself and dies. So is that a good life? It's like, it's all from the white man's hand. So I didn't know this either. Leonard Cohen wrote a book about her called The Beautiful Losers in 1966, before he became a musician, when he was just started out as a writer. And he went to McGill University in Montreal, and he's buried in Montreal. So in an episode of the French animation series Clementine, a time-traveling main character, Clementine Dumont, meets and befriends a younger version of Tekakwitha. She's portrayed as a shy teenager who is isolated and harassed by her peers after her conversion. But with Clementine's help, she earns the love and respect. Okay, a Brooklyn-based Irish singer also wrote a song about her after he went to St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, because there's I think an image of her there. And she's known as the Lily of the Mohawks, right? I said that before. And she's also, the turtle is her symbol. This was written about the Beautiful Losers book that Cohen wrote. The Mohawk Kateri Tekakwitha was a 17th century Christian convert. She is raised by her kind uncle and cruel aunts after the death of her parents when she was 4. The aunts tried to get her husband, but first he turns her down. Later she runs away from him. When she returns, she is beaten by her aunts, takes to pious self-mortification with great zeal, to such a degree that the Jesuit priests find they must restrain her. Following her death at the age of 24, her skin becomes white. Okay, so is that a white aura, or are they just saying like she turns into a white person, right? So it's like, she is associated with Edith, the Virgin Mary, and Isis throughout the work. So Leonard Cohen has her basically as the divine feminine, right? So which is Isis, which is the Venus star, right? So Venus was, on the tail of the whale when she died. And at the time the book was written, she had been beatified by the church and was known as the Blessed Kateri Tekakwitha. In 2012, she was made a saint. Yeah, so there you go. So that's his version of the story, and I think it's a pretty correct version. I watched a few different movies about her, and that was really, to me, it seemed like, she was not fitting into the Mohawk tribe because of her scars. She didn't feel good, and she lost all her family. So she just thought, this was a better path, but I don't. If she'd known what was going to happen in the future, I don't think she would have done it. So they're still pulling it into modern day symbolism. So on April 4th, 2021, on Easter Sunday, The only Catholic church at St. Teresa's Point in northern Manitoba, Canada, burned down. The only things that were left after the rubble was an image of Saint Kateri, almost completely intact, as well as the Mary statue. In May 2021, a church that was built in St. Kateri's honor for the second time burnt down on Bays Mill Indian Community in Upper Pennsylvania of Michigan. So, okay, so the burning of the church, and then she's still intact. So it's like a symbolism of ascension, right? So she's tying into representing like the Mother Mary, okay? So after Tekakwitha's beatification in 1980, they're just talking here about how much she is honored. You know, they created a monument for her in Kanawaki. It was a $1,000 granite monument from Walworth, who was one of the strongest proponents of Tekakwitha's veneration. There's lots of schools named after her: Hamilton, Ontario, Kitchener, Ontario, Markham, Ottawa, Calgary, Mississauga. There's one school in New York, California at Santa Clarita. Yeah, so there's like, it's all over the place. There's even one, the Chapel of the Welsh Family Hall in the University of Notre Dame, built in 1997, is dedicated to Kateri Tekakwitha. So she's like really, really, really honored. The Feast of Annunation in Greek is known as, also called the Lady Day, the Feast of Incarnation. And this is to do with the Virgin Mary, right? So it's when it commemorates the visit of Archangel Gabriel to the Virgin Mary, during which he informed her that she would be the mother of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. It is celebrated on March 25th each year. I just thought that was interesting because it's tying into the mother, right? And her being, you know, the Virgin Mary. So this is what this is all about. It's all about the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus. And it's really, and that's what the divine feminine represents. It's Mary. Now it can also be Mary Magdalene, which is also a representation of the divine feminine, but it's always tying into the mother. Now it can be, if you want to go more into occult practices or to pagan practices, it would be the Mother Earth, right? Because she's the one that bursts. So it's like, it's a symbolism. It's always like feminine is the inner work going inward, and then which is the moon going into your ancestral past, going into your memories. It's all the inner work. And then the sun is more projecting outward and kind of expanding and growing outward, right? So one's the birth and one is like the growth. And it's just male and female energies. It's the yin and the yang. So back to the Pope's visit, he ends up, after being at this church where Kateri Tekakwitha's statue is, at St. Anne's de Beaubry, he does another stop at St. Alphonse, which is just an elderly center for the sick in Canada. Now, what I found interesting was the address was the Boulevard St. Anne. So it's always St. Anne, right? He went to Lake St. Anne, he went to the Church of St. Anne de Beaubry, and then he went to this old people's home, which is St. Anne. Now, who is St. Anne? St. Anne is the mother of the Virgin Mary. So it's basically Jesus' grandmother. According to Christian apocryphal, which means doubtful, and Islamic tradition, St. Anne was the mother of Mary and the maternal grandmother of Jesus. Mary's mother is not named in the canonical Gospels. In writing, Anne's name and that of her husband, Joachim, come only from the New Testament Apocrypha, of which the Gospel of James seems to be the earliest of the mentions of them. The mother of Mary is mentioned but not named in the Quran. Two well-known shrines of Saint Anne are that of Saint Anne de Ré in Brittany, France, and that of Saint Anne de Beaubrie near city of Quebec. And that's where the Pope went. The number of visitors at the Basilica of Saint Anne de Beaubrie is the greatest on Saint Anne's feast day, July 26th, and that's like around when he was there, right? The Sunday before Nativity of the Virgin Mary, September 8th. In 1892, Pope Leo XIII sent a relic of Saint Anne to the church. Whoa, so that's crazy. So Saint Anne's relic is in this church. So this is part of the whole reason why he visited there. Okay, so on July 26th, on Saint Anne's feast day. In the Maltese language, the Milky Way galaxy is called Ittric to Saint Anna, literally the way of Saint Anne. Okay, this is what blew me away. So it's part of the Milky Way. The Imperial Russia, the Order of Saint Anne was one of the leading states decorations. In the United States, the Daughters of the Holy Spirit named the former Annehurst College in her honor. Anne is remembered with Joachim in the Church of England with the Lesser Festival on July 26th. See, so it is all about July 26th. That's why he's here this time. It is now known in the Greek Orthodox Church at the Feast of the Conception by Saint Anne the Most Holy, Theotokos, the celebration on December 9th. Okay, so then in the Roman Catholic Church, the Feast of Saint Anne and Joachim is celebrated on July 26th as well. Okay, so there you go, July 26th. That's why he's here, because it ties to the grandmother of Jesus, but also the Milky Way. So the Milky Way, or the galactic center, right, is all to do with this spiral. It's the spiral. It's basically negentropy, which is expanding outward of golden ratio. That's what this whole realm is all about. It's about expanding your consciousness. So everything shaped in a spiral is expanding outward. So the Sagittarius arm and the Norma arm are surrounding like the egg, the golden egg in the center. And then they also have the Pleiades. I circled them down at the bottom here. But I'll just show you Sagittarius and Norma in the sky. And you can see the Milky Way crossing the ecliptic, the red line there. It's like a golden egg, right? That's the Milky Way expands there like the golden egg. And that's the galactic center. It's the middle of this spiral. Now, Norma constellation is on the right here in the circle. And that in Chinese mythology ends up being the square and the level. So it's like the symbols for Freemasonry. And then right below that, you have Circinus, which is the compass, and you have the triangle. So these are all the symbols of measuring the sky, right? Now, right at the tip, of the Scorpio, or the center of this galactic center, is Scorpio, which is the kiss of death, or you could say transformation. It has to do with where your Kundalini begins, which is in your hips. Scorpio rules your hips. So it's like the beginning of your awakening, your energy. Now at the bottom, like I said, the Pleiades are there. It's like there's this, they have the sun there, and the Pleiades and the Orion Nebula. And this is all super important as well, because this is Taurus. This is Isis's gate, right? It's this, the Taurus's horns is a gate. It's Isis's gate. So that is where Trump is born, and where the Crab Nebula is, which is the very first nebula to ever have sound recorded from, okay, which is in Isis's gate. But the Pleiades is where the labyrinth is. It's the bull, right? It's the bull, and that's where the Minotaur bull is in the center of the labyrinth, which is Taurus constellation. So this is interesting that it's all to do with Orion and Taurus, and I'll get into this more, but I just wanted to show you this, the picture of the Milky Way in this perspective. So that's what St. Anne's is all about. It's the Milky Way. So even though he's going around and he's visiting all these places, and you can see it as more like a conversion of, the native Kateri to over to becoming, Christian. You can see it from that layer of consciousness, or you could see it where he's dropping clues that this is all about the cardinal points and the Milky Way, which he did. He dropped these clues. So you have to dig in really deep and go into your inner work and always try to understand there's a polarity and everything. If you're looking at it in a negative context, you have to dig deeper to find the positive if you can't see the positive. So it's always like trying to find the answer so that you can get to this higher vibration of bliss, right? And to see it as all divine. Even when something looks negative, that's only one side of it. It has the flip side of that coin. So anyhow, I just think it's fascinating where he went, and it is really fascinating for me personally because I have ties to that reservation. And so does my late husband. He used to spend a lot of time there with his friends. And, he had a lot of First Nation friends. So I was just like, whoa, this is crazy. Okay, so and then with me doing the saging, the sage came from that island in that reservation. And then that's when the information came to me. For me, it's all divine. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this. It was fun putting it together. I'm going to announce the next class probably tomorrow. I'll do an announcement for the class next week, and it's getting more into more fun esoteric teachings. So definitely check out the little preview for my class, and yeah, so keep enjoying this realm. It's getting crazier by the day, but the path of the Pope was fascinating, totally fascinating.